business leader Arthur Scargill found himself at the center of a major financial scandal. Reports in the Daily Mirror and ITV's The Cook Report accused him of using miners' funds to pay off his mortgage and claimed that more than £1 million donated to the miners had gone missing. 1 year later, the British public remains confused by the story, and a whiff of corruption still hangs over Mr. Scargill. But is this fair? Was there ever any basis for the allegations against him? Tonight's dispatch seeks to redress the balance, revealing the serious flaws in the original reports, confronting the reporters with the evidence they should have found for themselves. Making his dispatch's debut, award-winning director Ken Loach joins forces with investigative reporter Lorraine Hegasey on the quest to unravel the Arthur legend.
Scargill and the Libyan money, the facts.
Miners' leader Arthur Scargill got £163,000 in strike support from Libya and used a large chunk of it to pay personal debts.
One of the allegations we want to put to him tonight is that he used Libyan money destined for hardship relief to pay off that mortgage.
Please tell me why you failed to establish whether Arthur Scargill had a mortgage. Because if you'd established that and you'd realised he didn't have a mortgage, your story would have fallen through and you'd have had no programme.
It's December 1984, halfway through the strike, and the three men who run the NUM are counting out the cash to pay off their personal loans when many striking miners were losing their homes.
It's the one thing I would never have accused either Scargill or Heathfield of corruption, personal dishonesty on their part. And frankly, I still wouldn't. I still find it very hard to accept that either of them would have, so to speak, put their hands in the till. They're not that sort of people.
Do you think he was talking to the Mirror even before he left the NUM?
That's impossible to say, but...
To seasoned watchers of the industrial scene, there was much in the Daily Mirror and the Cook Report that didn't ring true. On the face of it, the stories were sensational. The enemy within had taken money from the enemy without and used it to line his own pocket. The claims were damning. That Arthur Scargill had taken money from Colonel Gaddafi, that he'd used that money to pay off his own mortgage, and that £1 million donated by Russian miners had gone missing. But reading between the lines, the story just didn't add up, even though it came from a seemingly impeccable source, the NUM's former chief executive, Roger Windsor.
Scargill opened the suitcase and proceeded to count out into 4 piles £10,000 for the Notts NUM miners, £29,000 for my own bridging loan, £17,500 for Peter Heathfield's extension, and £25,000 for Mr. Scargill's own house in Yorkshire or his mortgage with the Yorkshire Union.
Tell us about the money, Arthur.
Lies and Mr. Scargill.
Probe calls as TV backs the Mirror.
Tell us all, Arthur.
To be accused of using £25,000 of union money during the course of a year-long strike to pay off my personal mortgage is absolutely obscene. The fact that I paid off my mortgage with individual cheques from my own bank accounts would have clearly demonstrated that I was telling the truth. And that is the payment from the Building Society. It's endorsed on the back, which is very clear.
Paid on the 8th of August. And this evidence would have been available to the Cook Report and the Mirror if they'd asked you the question?
The problem, as far as the Cook programme was concerned in the Mirror, was that if they put questions to me about my mortgage, they presumably would have been told that I would have given the answer, which I've given you, and that is I didn't have a mortgage. Now, you must admit that if you've got a central story that contains an allegation that you've got a mortgage that has been paid off by the trade union, and in turn you're able to demonstrate that that's untrue, and that the mortgage has been paid off many months before with your own money, then the whole story begins to collapse like a pack of cards.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Is that the Daily Mirror?
Yes.
Could you put me through to Richard Stott, please, the editor? Sure. We tried repeatedly to find out why the Daily Mirror hadn't asked Arthur Scargill about his mortgage. But Richard Stott, the editor, refused to allow us to do an interview with the main reporter on the story, industrial editor Terry Pattinson. Jill, it's Lorraine Hegarty here.
Yes.
I was wanting to record an interview with Richard Stott over the phone just to ask him why he has refused to allow Terry Pattinson to do an interview with us.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think he'd do that at all.
Why not?
Well, I just don't think he will.
Cook Report editor Mike Townsend was keen to engage in correspondence, but reluctant to allow his star to appear before our cameras to explain why he had never asked Arthur Scargill when or how he had paid off his mortgage. Both the Daily Mirror and the Cook Report rely heavily on the evidence of one man, Roger Windsor, the NUM's former chief executive. Yet Roger Windsor is involved centre stage in all the allegations he makes. Time after time, Windsor has played a crucial role in events that have subsequently been used to discredit Arthur Scargill. Windsor's accusations go beyond personal corruption. He claims that Arthur Scargill pushed him into making contact with the Libyan government via a middleman called Altaf Abbasi.
A meeting was arranged between Altaf Abbasi and Arthur Scargill at the TUC conference in the Winter Gardens at Blackpool.
The meeting was in fact not at the TUC conference, as Cook claims, but at the Labour Party conference. The Mirror gives great details of the secrecy that surrounded Scargill's meeting with the mysterious Mr. Abbasi.
It was in the Planet Room, which is a gigantic tea room at the Labour Party conference. Mr. Windsor asked me to go over and meet this man, which I did, with another colleague who was accompanying me.
And how much attention were you attracting during that party conference from the press?
Almost constant attention. In fact, one television crew followed me into the gents' toilet, so you can tell what sort of surveillance I was under. If I wanted any secret meetings, I certainly wouldn't have picked the Planet Room at the Winter Gardens, Blackpool, to have a meeting.
Deep in the heart of southwest France, a couple of hours' drive from Bordeaux, is the place where Roger Windsor has taken his family to live. The decision to move to France seems to have been abrupt. Neither his wife nor his children could speak French, and as a result, both his sons have been kept back 2 years at school. Windsor himself had no job to go to. Perhaps he simply wanted to be out of Britain when his stories appeared in the press. He'd already had a taste of what it was like to be in the limelight after the publicity that surrounded his controversial visit to Libya during the middle of the miners' strike.
At what stage of the Libyan visit did it become apparent to you that you were going to meet Colonel Gaddafi?
I'd gone to Libya with the intention and at the invitation to meet Colonel Gaddafi.
Well, Abbasi, who went with you, has told me that you did not go with that specific intention, that you went there to meet trade unionists, and it was only once you were there that you were told that you were going to meet Colonel Gaddafi.
Incorrect.
Are you saying that Abbasi is lying to me then?
I'm not saying Abbasi is lying, I'm telling you the truth. You draw your conclusions.
Roger Windsor couldn't have drawn more attention to his visit if he'd tried. The pictures were shown throughout Britain and upset many of the strike's supporters. What's at issue is the original purpose of his visit. The story Windsor tells now is very different to that he told at the time.
I was on a train coming up from London, and he went into great detail. The story lasted some 40 minutes. It started with the fact that Arthur was out of the country, Peter was speaking in Prague, and he'd been volunteered to go to Libya to speak to North African trade unionists, seeking assistance, of course, for the miners.
And did he volunteer this story, or had you been specifically asking him about it?
He volunteered it. How strange it had happened, how after the meeting with the trade unionists, his taxi was surrounded by jeeps and he was taken off into the desert and past all the fortifications around Gaddafi's tent, didn't realise the whole thing was being filmed. So it was the opposite of what we'd heard when he submitted the case to the newspapers and the TV and the press, and it was rather strange.
I don't think so. I can't, in all honesty, remember the particular... I remember travelling with Peter McNestry on a train on a number of occasions, and I don't think that I would have bored him with my visit to Libya had he not requested it.
Whichever way you look at it, either Roger Windsor was lying to me at that time, although I hadn't asked for any stories, or he's lying now. Whichever way you look at it, he's got to admit he's lied on one occasion.
The Cook Report and the Daily Mirror claim that some weeks after Windsor's Libyan trip, Altaf Abbasi came through Heathrow 3 times carrying large sums of cash for the NUM. Abbasi says customs stopped him once, but then let him through. It seems highly unlikely that intelligence were unaware of his movements, since Libya was suspected of funding the IRA. Abbasi's terrorist links were exposed by the Sunday Times in an article on Windsor's visit to Gaddafi. He was European representative of a paramilitary group backed by Libya. Furthermore, at precisely the time Abbasi says he brought the money in, Special Branch were told that he was involved in a plot to kill a former Libyan Prime Minister. So why did Special Branch allow Abbasi to carry cash through Heathrow? And why did Windsor use a man known to be suspect?
Policewoman Yvonne Fletcher was barely 6 months dead, yet Arthur Scargill, whatever he says, was seeking money from her murderers.
Roger Cook was keen to use the Libyan connection to attack Arthur Scargill, but he failed to point out that the British government had no objection to trading with Libya after the death of Yvonne Fletcher. In fact, during the strike, Libyan imports nearly doubled to over £311 million, and most of those imports were oil that could be used as an alternative fuel to defeat the miners. In any case, Arthur Scargill says Windsor told him that the money came from a French trade union, the CGT.
My understanding is what I was told at the time, and that was that the money came from the CGT.
Who told you that?
Mr. Windsor. And there's no question that the monies which came in are all recorded. I don't think there's any argument about the fact that Mr. Windsor brought monies into this office. We said that long before any allegations were made in the Daily Mirror or on the Cook report. The fact is that the £150,000 that Mr. Windsor allegedly brought into the office is all there. If it emanated from Libya, then he knows that, and we certainly didn't.
Ironically, the main beneficiary of the cash transactions that Windsor claims took place was Windsor himself. To this day, he has not paid his £29,500 bridging loan, despite the fact that he has twice moved house. The NUM's former finance officer, Steve Hudson, believes Windsor did not have any intention of repaying that loan.
Yeah. He says here, he obviously knew, Roger Windsor, knew he owed £30,000 and was trying to get out of paying it. In my opinion, he has been trying to get out of paying it ever since he received the money. At no time did he intimate that he would repay.
Well, I'm sorry, I take issue with Hudson, who's allowed his name to be used in a number of fraudulent documents which have been submitted to the Lightman inquiry.
Hello, Margaret.
Hello, is that the Daily Mirror?
Yeah.
Could you put me through to Richard Stott, the editor, please?
Yeah, 1 moment, please.
Editor's office.
Hello, I'm ringing to try to speak to Richard Stott. It's Lorraine Hegarty from Channel 4 Dispatches.
No, listen, can you speak to Charles Collier-Wright? He's our legal man. I'll put you over to him. Hold on.
Okay. Mr. Collier-Wright, my name's Lorraine Hegarty. I'm a producer with Channel 4 Dispatches.
Yeah.
I just want to let you know that I'm recording this telephone conversation.
Right.
For possible use later. Right. I'm not quite sure why I've been put through to you, because I actually was wanting an editorial judgment, and I seem to have been put through to a lawyer, but perhaps you can enlighten me. Frustrated in our attempts to get simple answers to simple questions from the Daily Mirror, we were left with no alternative but to turn up on reporter Terry Pattinson's doorstep. He'd been forbidden by his editor from doing an interview with us, although he would have been quite happy to appear on camera. Mr. Pattinson has persistently maintained that he stands by every dot and comma of his story.
We stated publicly at the time, and our position hasn't changed, that, as you just said yourself, we stand by every dot and comma of it. We publicly challenged Mr. Scargill to sue. More than one occasion.
How much did you pay Roger Windsor?
It's none of your business.
I think it is my business, because it's the public's business. I mean, somebody makes serious allegations. The public has in a public newspaper, and the public has a right to know how much that person has been paid.
We paid him more than £1 and less than £1 million.
In fact, the Mirror's 2 main witnesses were paid handsomely. Jim Parker, Arthur Scargill's former driver, received £50,000, and Windsor got £80,000. Windsor was paid the extra £30,000 to enable him to repay the bridging loan, but it remains unpaid.
If you're talking about investigative journalism, I think, and the principal people who've cooperated with you have been paid money to cooperate, then I think that report should have carried in the Daily Mirror and on Central TV a health warning that these interviews were paid for.
The principal allegation you made was wrong. Arthur Scargill did not use £25,000 to pay off his mortgage because Arthur Scargill had no mortgage.
Mr. Scargill
Gavin Lightman found that allegation, and I quote, entirely untrue.
Mr. Lightman couldn't prove that aspect.
Mr. Lightman was satisfied with the proof, which I have, which is a copy of the cheque with which Arthur Scargill paid off his mortgage, and the other cheque stub with which he paid off his mortgage to the NUM. These two together totaled the sum of his mortgage.
Suing us then?
Maybe he doesn't want to sue you.
I think that there was a deliberate attempt to try and get me to sue for libel. And of course, during the course of a trial which would have cost possibly £1 million or even £2 million, we would have been in a situation where we would have been running through the entire history of the miners' strike, including all the methods that were used at the time, as far as picketing was concerned, as far as organisation was concerned, as far as the raising of money was concerned for the organisation and for separate organisations which helped sustain the fabric of the union. Now, in those circumstances, you ask yourself one question: what is the object of the exercise?
We will bring out all our evidence, as I keep on telling you, in a court of law.
Yeah, but that's no justification, is it? If you have evidence, you should print it. You can't make an allegation for which you do not have substantiation, and you don't have substantiation for that evidence.
You don't know what our evidence was.
Well, I can only assume that you would have produced it after Gavin Lightman found your allegation to be entirely untrue.
Well, you know as well as I do that
this
journalism...
is the story you won Scoop of the Year for, and yet the main allegation has been found to be entirely untrue.
Despite the much-coveted Scoop of the Year award, some of the glaring inconsistencies in the Mirror story are plainly evident to the careful reader. On Monday, March the 5th, the Mirror said £163,000 was taken into the NUM. The following day, the amount had mysteriously dwindled to £50,000.
Therefore, there seems to be a fundamental contradiction in your story. How can you explain that?
The very fact that you can't understand our story, which is written in Daily Mirror language for Daily Mirror readers, is a problem for you and not for me.
I'm not saying that everything the Mirror published was totally correct. They didn't possibly see their function as to have every dot and comma correct. That's unfortunate.
Thanks very much, Mr. Pattinson.
Absolutely a pleasure. As Mr. Scargill would say, honour and a privilege. Don't hesitate to come back.
Forgery. We reveal home loan document is a fake.
The beneficiary of the forged papers was that shadowy body in Paris, the International Miners' Organisation. The president, Mr. Scargill, of course. So who was the forger?
And Windsor says he never signed this document.
Last July, the Mirror and Cook seized on Roger Windsor's claims that documents submitted by the NUM to the Lightman inquiry had been forged. One such document purported to show that Windsor's bridging loan had been transferred to the International Miners' Organisation. Windsor refuses to accept this, or to repay the IMO. He says the names and addresses of the witnesses and his wife's signatures were all forged.
Well, I've compared it with writings and signatures of Roger Windsor, and my conclusions are that it's probably genuine. As far as the signature is concerned, we have a pretty fluent signature, as far as one can tell from the photocopy. It compares pretty well with the signatures of Roger Windsor, which I have available here.
So your conclusion, as far as you can judge, is?
That this is probably a genuine signature of Roger Windsor.
Now let's move on to the names and addresses of the witnesses.
Yes, well, the U, for instance, would be quite a letter to show you. The word required there. Slightly higher on the right-hand side, actually, and the same applies in the word Stroud over here, in Gloucestershire. Again, that same difference in height of the left-hand and the right-hand side.
You claim that that document is a forgery.
Correct.
We've had an independent forensic expert to analyse that document, and he says that the signature certainly looks like yours. You admitted on the Cook report that it looks like yours.
Yes.
He says there's no indication that that signature is a forgery.
But the signature is a forgery. It's not a document that either myself or my wife signed. It was certainly not witnessed by the people who purported to have witnessed it.
Well, our forensic expert has also come up with the conclusion that the handwriting of Merrill and Roy Hyde's name and address is very similar to your own handwriting.
I don't know how they come to that conclusion. That is not correct. I have agreed and requested here in France that a handwriting expert be appointed by the courts to study the document.
Where did our rubles go? Russian miners want answer from Scargill.
Angry Soviet miners' leaders yesterday called on Arthur Scargill to come clean about what happened to the millions of rubles collected for Britain's embattled pitmen.
With Scargill cleared of personal corruption, the Mirror and Cook started to focus on the missing rubles, claiming he'd diverted money from Russia into an international miners' organisation account.
Scargill denied any Russian money had been received until we traced its route. It could have gone to England, but instead, as Lightman confirmed, it did a loop through Eastern Europe and on to Dublin, where it still sits in an IMO account.
A senior banker told us the money was turned back from the NUM Swiss account because of an error in the transfer instruction. Arthur Scargill had absolutely nothing to do with the decision. The Russians had already shipped food to Britain and provided holidays for strikers and their families in the Soviet Union. Curiously, customs refused to allow most of the food into the country, and it was sent to Ethiopia instead. But there was also a debate about sending financial aid. One man who took an active part in that debate was Oleg Gordievsky, here disguised for television. A double agent working with British intelligence, he was the KGB representative in London. He advised Mikhail Gorbachev on the strike before his historic first meeting with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. At that meeting, Mrs. Thatcher specifically asked Mr. Gorbachev not to help the striking miners. This fitted in with the advice he had been given by the KGB in London.
Knowing the situation in the country and the Soviet interests in Great Britain, I came to the conclusion that it was undesirable and counterproductive for the Soviet Union to help the striking miners. And in the KGB report sent to Moscow, the recommendation was not to send any money to the British miners. The telegram from the embassy to Moscow made the same recommendation, no money.
In December 1985, which is a long time before the Cook report and a long time before the Daily Mirror made its allegations, I wrote to Mikhail Shrebny, the president of the Soviet miners, and I asked Shrebny to confirm that the Soviet miners had not sent any money, any cash, to the National Union of Mine Workers during the course of the 1984-85 miners' strike. Now, if the Soviet miners leadership had sent money, certainly if they sent £1 million or $1 million, there is no way, in my humble submission, that they would not have responded immediately and said, we don't know what you're talking about. We sent $1 million or £1 million to X bank account. No reply was ever received. And that demonstrates to me very clearly that no money was ever sent from the Soviet miners to the NUM.
The only way to find out more about the Russian money was to visit the Soviet Union, which neither the Cook report nor the Mirror appear to have done. Even then, getting to the truth is far from easy. Despite greater openness, the old Stalinist habit of rewriting the past to fit in with present needs dies hard. Here as elsewhere, people make themselves unavailable when to comment might be embarrassing. The new independent trade unionists, with their drive for a market economy, regard men like Arthur Scargill with some suspicion. We called on one of their representatives who was in Moscow to deal with the recent miners' strike. He clearly remembers having 9 rubles deducted from his salary to help the British miners.
Were the miners told what happened to the money that was raised and how much was raised overall?
Говорили шахтерам, что случилось с деньгами и вообще сколько денег вы набрали?
Нет. Вообще будем говорить, до 90-го года мы практически ими не интересовались. Потому что мы привыкли, что идет... Допустим, я был уверен, что они попали по назначению.
Before 1990, they didn't ask such questions. Anyway, he thought they reached their destination.
Did they know, for example, that money had been spent on food and clothing shipments?
Yuri said no. They knew nothing about this. They simply donated the money. So if the rank-and-file miners didn't know what had happened to the money that was raised, what about the former union officials? Our interpreter Daphne Skillen took us to see the man who'd been the secretary of the union.
Люди, которые не хотели, дескать, не должно быть вмешательства, что ли, Москвы.
He told us that some people had argued that Moscow shouldn't interfere with the internal affairs of Britain because they didn't want to ruin relations with Thatcher's government. It was felt that humanitarian aid like food shipments would be more politically acceptable than cash. How much did those shipments and the holidays cost?
Вы знаете, сколько стоило вообще эти корабли, которые, чтобы нанять эти корабли?
Я не знаю этой суммы, я не интересовался.
He doesn't know.
So although you were General Secretary of the trade union, you actually had no idea about the sort of details of how much money was raised, what that was spent on, which bank account it went into.
То есть было решение тогда Союза, нашего Союза, чтобы посылать...
Belousov didn't know about that either, because it would have been a party matter, handled by the All Trade Union Council.
Это пойдет. Или как это сделать, или каким образом...
He was also completely unaware that money had been sent to and turned back from Switzerland.
What happened after your television appearance in the Soviet Union? How were you reprimanded?
Что случилось после того, как вы выступили по телевидению?
Belousov went on Soviet television to speak of solidarity with the British miners. He called for an embargo on fuel exports to Britain. Then the government seemed to have a change of heart. He was hauled before the Central Committee of the party and subsequently removed from his post. And for what reason? For excessive frankness. Belousov had been confident to speak out because he knew support for the British miners came from the highest level in the party. Foreign Secretary Gromyko himself had approved the donation of money from the precious Soviet foreign currency reserves. This money appears to have been quite separate from the miners' collection. So had Mrs. Thatcher's request to Gorbachev not to help the strikers made the government change its mind? It seems likely they came up with a face-saving formula, putting the money in an international fund for miners throughout the world. Of course, it would also be available to the British if they needed it. Next stop was the Workers' and Trade Union Information Agency. When a decision was made that the Coal Miners' Union would give money to the British Miners' Union, who would have made that decision?
Я полагаю, что кампания международного характера могла быть санкционирована только на уровне ЦК Компартии. Только официальный Центральный комитет коммунистической партии мог принять решение организовать кампанию в поддержку горняков.
We know that when Mr. Gorbachev went to see Mrs. Thatcher in December '84, that she expressly asked him not to send money to the British miners. Do you think that that would have influenced the decisions made back in the Soviet Union as to which account and for what purpose the money was sent?
Горбачев готов идти на соглашение с правительствами. Горбачев готов пойти на любой шаг, который с его точки зрения прагматически оправдан. В данном случае для Горбачева нет коммунистических классовых догм. Если для него выгоднее договориться с английским правительством, чем помочь английским шахтерам, он, конечно, пойдет на договор с правительством.
Would it have been possible for Arthur Scargill to actually decide which accounts this money should be paid into?
Артур Скаргилл мог бы решить, куда эти деньги. Мог бы он участвовать в таких решениях или нет?
Я думаю, что это в принципе исключено. Я думаю, что в Советском Союзе решение о перечислении денег, о том, кому конкретно оказывать помощь или не оказывать ее, принималось в этот момент исключительно на уровне так называемого политического руководства, то есть на уровне Центрального комитета Компартии.
Onto the stage this week have stepped the Russians, independent trade union activists determined to retrieve their misappropriated money. Yuri Bachenko is outraged by the Leitman report.
Не знаю, по-моему, это безобразие.
I am disgusted. It's terrible.
Quite how Yuri Bachenko managed to read the lengthy Leitman report when he spoke not a word of English remains a mystery. Bachenko was not the only Russian miner to be used by right-wing trade unionists and other interested parties in the West for their own ends, in this case to discredit Arthur Scargill. Ironically, Bachenko himself has now been discredited and expelled from the Independent Miners' Union for misappropriating equipment. The Daily Mirror and the Cook Report chose to commemorate the 5th anniversary of the miners' strike
by mounting an attack on its leader. Yet it was precisely because he'd run the strike that Arthur Scargill was vulnerable to such an attack. Large sums of cash flowed in to help relieve the hardship facing strikers and their families. When the NUM's accounts were sequestrated, some of the strike supporters set up bank accounts. Others gave loans to maintain the fabric of the union. After the strike, there wasn't enough money left to repay those loans. The most reliable way of generating income was to leave money in the separate accounts to accumulate interest. The terms of the loans were that they should be repaid within 5 years and that they should stay secret. Those terms were respected, but the secrecy that surrounded them has now been turned against Arthur Scargill to make it look as if the smears had substance.
I suppose it's hard for people to realise now the kind of commitment that people gave during that strike, but it was a very, very strong belief on a large number of people that it was wrong to have stopped that trade union from functioning, and that it was necessary, therefore, to avoid the state's interference for us to remain secret for as long as we had to pay back those loans, and I think that was right.
Various reasons have been given for last year's attack on Arthur Scargill. As pits have closed down, so the membership of the NUM has dwindled, and there's talk of a merger with the Transport and General Workers' Union.
You can imagine how many people may feel if the NUM was to merge with the Transport and General, a big union like that, form an energy section within that trade union, with Arthur Scargill as a leader, possibly propelled from that position into a powerful position within the Transport and General Workers' Union, how they would fear that.
It's no secret that the right wing of the Transport and General Workers' Union do not want Arthur Scargill in the T&G, and yet it's T&G policy to discuss a merger with the NUM, and that puts them in a very difficult position. Far easier if you can find ways of discrediting people and have to address the arguments that they bring forward.
What about the Conservative Party's political agenda, though? How was
the spectre of privatisation. And I mean, Arthur himself always said, I think probably throwing it as a joke, but it was serious, that who was going to privatise the industry when Arthur Scargill was in charge. See, and somewhat there's some truth in that. You know, where we've got a leader of the calibre of Arthur Scargill, they want to get rid of him before they privatise. They want subservient people, they want UDM leaderships under private enterprise, they don't want people who are going to fight.
But I don't believe that that attack came from the Tory party. They were in the slipstream of the whole thing. Very quiet. The people who were attacking Scargill, straight out as soon as the Mirror came out with its allegations, the people who were straight out to attack Arthur Scargill were people from the Labour Party and the right wing of the trade union movement. Kevin Barron, Kim Howell.
Call in fraud squad. MP demands Scargill probe. Dr. Kim Howells made the first official call for police involvement in the cash scandal.
Well, it was a disgraceful episode. I mean, Kim Howells ought to know better. Kim Howells knew that what was going off without, for example, Arthur getting round the receivership and sequestration. We couldn't have paid staff.
Labour MP Kevin Barron, a member of the NUM executive, said the truth would not have come out but for the Mirror's revelations.
At the end of an NEC meeting once, or at the end of a special conference it was, and the first person I saw was Kevin Barron get into Pattison's car. There was a member of the NEC, if you like, going into the enemy, in inverted commas, car. The bloke that were writing the smear story.
I mean, I think in a way what's happened since is that the Labour Party is only too happy to see the memory of that strike be kicked over and rubbished by the Daily Mirror in particular, which is read by millions of working class people. Unfortunately, it now turns out. And I think they were only too glad to get rid of Arthur as a kind of alternative hero.
Mr. Scargill could still be a threat to Neil Kinnock at a party conference because of the power that he could generate there. Although he couldn't generate industrial power, he still had power within the movement, and you had to break that, and you also had to do something which, in the eyes of ordinary people, would be seen as something as having finally discredited Arthur Scargill, so that if Arthur Scargill got up and ever spoke again in public, people would know that he couldn't be trusted.
Kinnock heaps the scorn on Scargill.
Journalists who've worked with Roger Cook in the past were not surprised at the standard of his programmes about Arthur Scargill.
He doesn't do extended interviews. You will very rarely see him across the desk, as we are now, putting the tough questions. Instead, they do the doorsteps because it makes for sexy, glamorous, light entertainment television. I don't think that's anything to do with investigative journalism. It's showmanship. So you don't let them know what the questions are, you're rude to them, you insult them, and then you pitch up, and in no time at all, there's an argy-bargy because people are offended by this. So you never find out whether you can interview or not. All he is a kind of self-nominated punch bag.
Although we gave Roger Cook full details of our programme, he refused to do an interview on the pretext of also wanting our transmission date. NUM official Ken Capstick wanted to know why.
We've tried consistently to get you to do an interview, and you consistently failed to give us a time or a place. So we're here in the interest of fairness to put some questions to you.
In the interest of fairness, I think what you should do is give us a time for the interview.
You're billed as
we'll
Britain's top investigative journalist, and yet you failed to put to Arthur Scargill whether or not he had a mortgage.
If you give us a time, your transmission, we will then go ahead and give you an interview.
Answer the question, Mr. Cook. Why didn't you find out that Mr. Scargill didn't have a mortgage?
If you give us a time for the interview, as you've been requested to do...
Anyone could have found that out, Mr. Cook. Why did you fail to find it out? Or did you think that your viewers didn't have a right to know that?
If you give us a time for the interview, as I've said, and we can have the time to go through...
You also failed to tell the viewers that your main witnesses had been paid well over £100,000. Roger Windsor had been paid £80,000.
We didn't pay anybody... Anyway, look, we're not going to an interview
until
you give us the time. We're not going to go into...
Didn't you think your viewers had a right to know they'd been paid?
We're not going into an interview now.
Why didn't you tell your viewers the truth? Why did you try to discredit the National Union of Mine Workers?
A journalist who continually criticises the ethics of other people can expect his own behaviour to be subject to scrutiny. In a previous programme, Roger Cook followed the trail of a Brazilian baby who'd been taken without the mother's consent. The child had been unwittingly adopted by an Israeli couple. Cook engineered a meeting between the child's adoptive and natural mothers. However, the Brazilian woman did not perform as expected for the cameras.
That's a, if you stop, you'll see that that's not a shot from the same day. That's a shot that we shot on the second day with the tears in her eyes.
Now tell me about that. What happened?
Well, as you can see in the long shot, the Brazilian mother doesn't really react. She doesn't cry. She's not happy. She's quite non-caring about the whole thing. She doesn't behave like she's seeing her baby for the first time after 2 years. And the drama they were looking for in this encounter didn't happen. We went the next day to, as he called it, to get some cutaways. And in the process of that, he told the Brazilian mother, you now lean and look at the way where the baby is supposed to be. And she listened because all of a sudden, Roger Cook appears with a bottle of eye drops, salt water from the nearest pharmacy, and he puts it in her eyes. And then she looked like she was crying.
How often do you fabricate evidence for your programmes, Mr. Cook?
That's a libelous statement, Miss Hegarty.
How often do you?
We don't.
Then why did you put false teardrops in Rosilda's eyes in Israel?
If you discover, or if you read your newspaper properly, you will discover, and we're now going into generalities, you will discover that the Daily Mail, or the Mail on Sunday, had to apologise for the allegations it's made.
But it's true that you did put teardrops into Rosilda's eyes the day after you had filmed her with the mother.
This has got absolutely nothing to do with this programme.
Is that the standard of journalism you used on your Arthur Scargill programme, fabricating evidence?
You give us a time for transmission, and we will, as we've said in writing, give you an interview.
He faked something on television to try and get an effect, to get viewers' interest. And Central did nothing. And I can tell you, if Cook or I or you had done something like that at BBC Television, at This Week or World in Action, your feet wouldn't touch the ground because it's called faking evidence. Cook did it, and Central apparently don't care.
I have been in correspondence with Central for over 3 weeks now, and you've still failed to give me a time and a place for an interview. I have listed every single one of our interviewees. I have listed every single one of our question areas.
I've got an appointment at 8:30, which you must know, or you wouldn't be here.
So for once, Roger Cook was reluctant to face the camera. Neither he nor any member of the Cook team made any effort to respond to our questions. Why had Cook and the Daily Mirror not checked the mortgage allegation? Why did they accept the word of witnesses paid thousands of pounds for their stories and fail to disentangle the political background to the Russian money? Why did the Labour Party leadership jump on the bandwagon so eagerly? And what role did the intelligence services play? Tonight, more than a year after the stories appeared, neither Cook nor the Daily Mirror have produced hard evidence to support their serious allegations.
I don't think this affair will go away. I think what will happen that they will keep on with their attacks and their smears. They may even start with their personal attacks and their personal smears on Arthur Scargill. Now, that's a matter for them. Workers will have to determine where they stand on these issues. I know where I stand on them. I stand as firmly committed today as I did when I was a 15-year-old boy, in defence of my union, in pursuit of a socialist Britain. That's why I'm a socialist. That's why I'm a trade union official. And if that means that for my pains I'm attacked by the media, that I'm vilified and that I'm smeared, then so be it. Sooner rather than later, workers will make the judgment.